Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel for the next installment in our ongoing new figure showcase series, where we take a quick look at the latest addition to my personal collection and do a little review and posing session. For today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at Anna Marie by Soosoo Toys, and in case you can't tell, it's their version of Rogue from the X-Men. I do think it's very much inspired by the Jim Lee run on the X-Men comics with the very distinctive uniform, and of course this also goes hand in hand with the awesome X-Men cartoon series from the 90s. Although as you look at her, you'll very quickly see that she is a more realistic take on the character. And that realistic take, and specifically the sculpt, has been a big point of contention, it feels like, with people like myself thinking it looked okay and others just thinking Soosoo should have done something else. So it didn't feel like it felt like you were either or. And I mentioned that controversy at the start because Soosoo didn't help themselves with the packaging, and in particular the insert. So while the exterior of the box has a nice print that closely resembles the figure we got, the interior sleeve is a much different version of Rogue, maybe a little younger, and it looks very different from the sculpt they gave us. And I'm sure some collectors are going to feel like that might be a more accurate representation of the character. Now, talking about the figure, she was supposed to be released in December as part of this very ambitious plan that Soosoo came up with. And let's just say that those plans all seem to get derailed. And here she is, essentially 6 months late. And of those promised sneak peeks that they had, I think there's still a number of figures yet to be revealed. So, with that out of the way, let's take a look at the figure, and as we normally do, we'll start with the full package. And there's not much here. You get the figure, you get the jacket, which does come separately in a little bag, then you get 4 additional hands and the additional sculpt, and that is it. I'm sure they could have given her some other things, but I guess what they did provide does the job, and maybe there isn't much more to expect here. So moving on to accessories, let's start with the hands, and you get a pair of fists and a pair of wide open hands. Now, detail-wise, they look really nice with some good texture, and I like that they made the gloves feel like they're really tight around her fingers, and you're actually seeing skin-tight gloves. Paintwork is interesting here. I think they did some, and I'm sorry if I get this wrong, but some dark wash on the gloves to bring out some of the details, and it does work, but at the same time it makes the gloves look dirty, which doesn't entirely fit in with the rest of the figure's look, which is very clean. Next, we'll look at the jacket, which is really nicely done with great stitch work and nice detailing on the sleeves and the shoulders. And the belt around the waist actually includes a metal buckle, so I do think it's a nice piece. And of course, on her left arm, she does have that distinctive red and black X-Men crest. Now, as far as material, this doesn't feel like pleather, but is it actual leather? I'm honestly not sure. Maybe one of you knows better than I do. It does look good though, and fingers crossed it doesn't fall apart or start deteriorating. Now, final accessory is the Soosoo standard figure stand, with the X-Men logo on the center and the diamond plate texture on the rest of the base, all painted with the Rogue yellow and green, so it fits with the figure well. Now, my first complaint, a figure like Rogue who can fly should have shipped with some kind of flight pole. Base works, but you can't really achieve those great flight poses with what Soosoo is giving us here. Now, with that out of the way, let's look at the sculpts, and we'll start off with the more serious one, and I do have to say I like that sculpt a lot. There's great detail here around the eyes, and I like the more determined, stern look. From a paint and detail point of view, I like what Soosoo did with the eyelashes and eyebrows, and even the lips are really well done. And then you get the hair and her green hair tie. There's a lot going on here, and they molded the hair in a very dynamic looking pose. I do think it looks amazing, although in hand it does feel a little bit heavy. Now, one negative here, and I'm sure you can see it on the close-ups of the sculpt, her nose. The tip of the nose is shiny, almost like there was some paint rub in the packaging, which is annoying because of the 2 sculpts, I think this is the best one. And that does start a little trend for this figure, which is that there are a lot of little nagging things that annoyed me. But before getting into that, let's look at the alternate sculpt, and it looks okay. I mean, the detail work is there, and she does have that alternate smirking expression. There's nothing wrong with the sculpt or the detail work overall. I just don't think it looks nearly as good as the more serious face. Not sure what it is about this version of the figure or the face that I'm just not feeling, but there's no doubt in my mind that I'm going to be using the serious sculpt for display. Now, looking at the figure, she does come out of the box in just a jumpsuit, and I like the texture work and the heavier banding where the yellow of her suit meets the green with the honeycomb raised pattern. But I'm sure you can see that there are certain areas, especially around her neck, that look a tad sloppy. Other thing I don't like, the black zipper on the back of the suit. I mean, it's just really distracting. Although most of us are going to display her with the jacket, so that shouldn't be too big of an issue. Going down to the belt, it does ship with, and I kid you not, pieces of tissue between the belt and the bodysuit. And again, it just feels a little cheap. And I think as we keep going, you'll see that that's my biggest complaint here and the biggest feel I got with this figure. And just to bring your attention to another bad decision by Soosoo, the belt itself, which is nicely detailed and rubbery and has the distinctive X buckle, there's a lot to like on the belt, but they actually glued it down to the bodysuit. Why Soosoo did that, I have no idea. And the problem is that the glue won't hold, and in mine, after some light posing, the glue peeled off and it damaged the suit underneath. Is it the end of the world for me? Not really. The belt falls back into place and covers the damage, but it was a poor choice to do this on a figure like this. Then, going back, let's look at the boots. They look good, and I get what they were trying to do in giving us this very distinctive looking piece, but they suffer from the same feel as the gloves, which is that they're a little too dirty, especially when compared to the rest of the suit. And also, she does need to stand a lot. I found that she was a little difficult to get to stand by herself, and I don't know if that's a function of the boot or the joints, but it's just something to keep in mind. So where does that leave me? Overall, with the serious face, I do think the figure looks great, and I think it's a good version of that comic and cartoon Rogue that we saw and some of us grew up with. But I have to be honest with you, and at least for me, she's a bit disappointing. And it's not the look of the figure. That Soosoo did a great job with. It's more that this feels surprisingly rushed, even though it was delayed, and it feels cheap. That's really the best description I can think of to tell you what I felt when I was posing her. First, you had the belt issue. Not sure why they glued it down, especially when it doesn't need the glue. And by doing that, they ended up damaging the bodysuit. Next, you got the sloppiness with the paint bleed on the suit. And it didn't help, especially when you combine that with the scuff tip of her nose, which is just really disappointing. Then let's talk about the jacket. While it looks good, getting it onto the figure was actually surprisingly challenging. Not sure if it was the undersuit material creating friction with the jacket or whatnot, but I ended up having to work to get the arms to slide through the sleeves. And at the wrist pegs, the bodysuit is kind of tightly sewed around the joint. If you've had any of the any other figure like Spider-Man, you'll know what I'm talking about. But just due to the friction of trying to get the jacket on, it ended up pulling the bodysuit sleeve and pulling it clear of the joint. So now that's something I have to deal with. And speaking of joints, Soosoo did try something new with the wrist pegs. They don't feel as difficult to deal with when swapping hands as previous releases, which is a big plus because the older joints were too stiff. Here the swapping isn't bad, but the pegs themselves are super loose and floppy, and one of my hands kept falling off because I think the hole is actually a little oversized, so the peg doesn't lock in properly. Other complaint, the flight stand. She needed it, and I guess I can try to pick one up, but if Soosoo is going to try to keep on making flying figures, they should give us a stand that can achieve those poses. Crotch grabber they provided isn't great, and even though I was able to use it to get Rogue into some interesting poses, it just wasn't good overall, and even after just a few seconds, the stand left some indentation on the bodysuit. So look, I was excited for this one because I love the comics, and that X-Men cartoon was always a highlight. And even with the controversy surrounding the sculpt, I still really like the serious face. And it's funny, I thought that was going to be the biggest thing to talk about during this review, but it's just the rest of the design choices here that just made this a little frustrating and a bit disappointing. And look, maybe I was just unlucky. And if you're getting this figure, hopefully you don't have any of these issues. But mine definitely feels like it had a lot of QAQC misses that do detract from it. And it's a shame because I will say I think she does look good just standing there. So that is a huge shame for me because if she shouldn't have those issues, she'd be a great figure. Now, I'd be more upset again if she didn't look good. As it stands, I'm happy to have her, but she won't be winning any Figure of the Year awards, and I really have to think about whether or not I'll keep going on with this line if Soosoo does release anything else. Hopefully this review didn't feel like it was just negative after negative, and again, fingers crossed for all my fellow collectors, I just got unlucky. And maybe Soosoo is a victim of their own success here. I hold them to a pretty high standard given their past releases, so maybe my expectations were just too high. Regardless, that was a quick look at Rogue from Soosoo Toys, and I do have to reiterate, all issues notwithstanding, she does look pretty amazing. So at least from that perspective, I'm happy to have her in the collection. So, as always, thanks for watching, and let me know your thoughts, if any, and as always, if you are enjoying the content, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing, and we'll touch base on the next video.